My key didn't fit and I jammed. Replaced. In 3 days, someone changed the lock on my front door, swapped out my mailbox, bulldozed my native garden, and installed a cement frog holding a welcome sign like I was the intruder. Turns out the HOA president decided my yard didn't match her vibe. No warning, just vibes and petunias and apparently a fine for aesthetic disruption. When Dylan Mercer pulled into the driveway of his coastal home in Brookstone Hollow, he expected to be greeted by the soft rustle of native grasses swaying in the ocean breeze and the gentle mist of his drip irrigation system kicking on for the evening cycle. Instead, he was greeted by what looked like a cursed mashup between a garden gnome convention and a low-budget Alice in Wonderland reboot. His front yard had been transformed into a kaleidoscope of dying petunias, pastel pinwheels, a plastic welcome goose in a pink sun hat, and centerpiece of the horror, a cement frog holding a tiny American flag like it was about to sing the national anthem. Dylan stepped out of his Tesla, suitcase still in hand, and stared in stunned silence. Then he tried the front door. The key didn't fit, not jammed, replaced. The handle had been swapped entirely with a cheap contractor-grade knob he'd never seen before. For a moment, he considered the possibility that he'd arrived at the wrong house. But no, there was the smart mailbox he'd installed himself, now yanked out and replaced with a rusted tin box hanging by 2 screws. The porch lights had been switched to bright white LEDs that buzzed like angry wasps, and the security placard on the lawn had been replaced by one reading, "This home proudly follows HOA aesthetic guidelines." He took a long breath, circled to the back gate, thankfully still intact, and entered through the patio door, adrenaline creeping in. He dropped his bag and went straight to his laptop. Dylan Mercer wasn't just a homeowner. He was a privacy attorney specializing in digital evidence, with a background in cybersecurity and years of experience catching people doing shady things on camera. His entire home was wired with discreet surveillance, motion sensors disguised as bird feeders, microphones embedded in porch lights, cloud backups. Within minutes, he had the footage. A woman in her late 30s in flip-flops and a wildly patterned blouse that screamed clearance rack cruisewear, standing in his yard like she owned the zip code. She barked orders at a landscaping crew while waving a clipboard covered in glitter stickers and HOA logos. "Remove these scraggly weeds. Oh, and that ugly bush. Yes, all of it," she commanded. Her tone as cheery as it was menacing. "We're restoring neighborhood harmony." She was apparently the self-appointed fairy godmother of curb appeal. Dylan paused the video and zoomed in on the name tag pinned to her blouse. Karen Delaney, HOA president. Of course. He exhaled slowly, equal parts furious and fascinated. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd built a decorative trellis on top of it. He clicked through more footage. Karen filming selfie videos in front of his house, saying things like, "One more yard saved from visual chaos," while gesturing proudly to the lifeless petunias now wilting in the sun. She was even staging before and after shots like this was an HGTV audition. Dylan's yard had become a backdrop for her delusions of HOA influencer stardom. Curious and dreading what else she'd done, he checked the kitchen counter. There, neatly placed under a coaster bearing the HOA logo, was a letter. It had been hand-delivered. Inside, printed on high-gloss paper with the HOA's watermark, was a notice of violation and remediation penalty. Dylan scanned the bolded numbers and choked. $6,035. 0 cents due within 10 business days. Offenses listed included non-compliant flora, improper irrigation layout, and the cherry on top, disruption of community branding aesthetic. Dylan leaned against the counter, rubbing his temples. He wasn't sure what was more disturbing, that someone had coined the phrase branding aesthetic for a neighborhood, or that he was about to go full legal warfare over a frog statue and a dead garden. Dylan opened the fridge to grab water. Taped to the milk carton was another note in looping cursive. "Next time, don't make the neighborhood look like a swamp. HOA." Dylan stared at the $6,000 0 cents fine letter like it might spontaneously combust. In a way, he kind of hoped it would. The memory of that woman's glittered clipboard and smug expression burned hotter than the afternoon sun bouncing off his fried petunias. But the worst part wasn't what Karen Delaney had done to his yard. It was that he'd seen this coming. Not in a paranoid way, just in that sixth sense, this lady's going to be a problem way. The first time they met, she'd arrived like a walking red flag. It was just a week after he'd moved in. He had been installing a small, secure document drop box beside his front door, sleek brushed bronze, just under 18 inches tall and designed specifically for legal courier deliveries. Dylan had researched the HOA guidelines before making the purchase, because of course he had. That's when he heard it. The sharp clack of cheap flip-flops and the artificial cheeriness of someone practicing confrontation in the mirror. "Excuse me," a voice rang out. "What exactly are you doing to your facade?" Dylan turned to see her. Floral kimono, oversized sunglasses, and the ever-present clipboard like a deputy sheriff on a justice bender. She didn't introduce herself. She just gestured to the box like it was a crime scene. "I'm Dylan Mercer," he said politely. "Just moved in. This is a secure drop box for legal deliveries. It's compliant with Section 7.4 of the Architectural Standards." Karen blinked, then smiled with her teeth only. "That box is not in harmony with the visual narrative of Brookstone Hollow. You'll need to remove it by Monday." She scribbled something on her clipboard with a flourish, like she'd just passed a bill in Congress. Dylan raised an eyebrow. "It matches the bronze finish of the door handle and light fixtures, and Section 7.4 says..." Yes, I'm familiar," she cut him off. "But the Architectural Aesthetics Committee, of which I'm chair, has final say. Guidelines evolve. We prioritize cohesion over technicalities." Dylan had nodded then, keeping his cool. But he documented everything, photos, timestamps, even the exact section of the guideline. Something told him that interaction wasn't a one-time event. It wasn't long after that encounter that he met Angela. She lived across the street in a cozy craftsman bungalow with a blue door and a garden of basil, kale, and snap peas arranged in perfect rows. A retired nurse with a dry sense of humor and a soft spot for herbal tea, Angela waved him over one morning while watering her plants. "I saw the box," she said. "She's going to hate it." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "It matches everything." Angela smirked. "You think she cares about matching? She once filed a violation against me for growing vegetables, said my yard was starting to look too much like a farm. I told her it was either this or raising chickens. She didn't laugh." They talked for nearly an hour. Angela explained how Karen had slowly turned Brookstone Hollow into her personal mood board. She weaponized bylaws like Pinterest boards, applying rules selectively, rewriting others, and inventing new ones when existing ones didn't suit her whims. "She doesn't enforce the rules," Angela said. "She curates them." What alarmed Dylan most wasn't the power she had. It was how comfortable she seemed wielding it. "She's got the board wrapped around her glittery clipboard," Angela added. "Most of them are scared of confrontation. She bullies quietly, smiles while she strips your yard bare." As they wrapped up their chat, Angela handed Dylan a sprig of rosemary from her garden. "You're not being fined because your box is ugly," she said. "You're being fined because you knew the rule better than she did, and that scares her." Dylan chuckled at the absurdity, but deep down it resonated. Karen wasn't defending the rules. She was defending her ego. And Dylan, unfortunately for her, had just threatened its foundation. That evening, Dylan checked his cameras. Karen was back, measuring the distance between his mailbox and the sidewalk with a pink glitter ruler. By the time Dylan saw the footage of Karen wielding her pink glitter ruler, he should have known something bigger was coming, but even he, armed with legal knowledge, security systems, and a healthy suspicion of clipboard-wielding authoritarians, wasn't prepared for what she'd do next. It happened 2 weeks later, while Dylan was away at a legal tech conference in Seattle, a trip he had planned months in advance, complete with automatic light timers and scheduled irrigation cycles for his native garden. But apparently Karen had her own agenda for his yard, and she didn't believe in warning shots. The first alert hit his phone around 9:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Motion detected. Front yard, zone 3. Dylan casually opened the app between panels, expecting to see a stray cat or a windblown branch. What he saw instead was Karen, again, standing at the edge of his lawn in oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, directing a landscaping crew like she was producing a reality show. One man held a shovel, another a set of hedge trimmers, a third rolled out plastic pots filled with brightly colored annuals. Karen clapped once, sharply, and gestured to the ground. "This entire front bed," she said on the audio feed. "Remove everything, roots and all. We're installing the new layout by noon." Dylan nearly dropped his phone. His hands were already moving, screen recording, saving clips, activating full surveillance mode. He scanned the footage. Karen walking the crew through her design vision, pointing to a printed mock-up with color-coded flowers and artificial turf patches. Then came the kicker. She pulled out her phone, turned to the camera, and hit record. "Hey, neighbors," she chirped. "Today we're rescuing another Brookstone Hollow home from aesthetic neglect. This is all part of our community's ongoing beautification project." She smiled, panned across the existing garden like it was a crime scene, then cut to her newly delivered plants. "Before and after coming soon." By noon, the native garden plants Dylan had researched and hand-selected for pollinators and drought resistance was gone. The irrigation lines had been pulled up, coiled like snakes in the driveway. In their place, glossy-leafed ornamentals that looked like they belonged at a car dealership, not a coastal neighborhood. Karen had even erected a temporary sign in front of the lawn. Brookstone Hollow, a garden of visual harmony that had a logo, a hashtag, and a QR code that led to her personal blog titled Curb Appeal Crusader. Dylan wasn't sure what was worse, the plants or the branding. The real horror came that night. Dylan received a new notification from the HOA portal. Emergency landscaping remediation fee, $3,400, 0 cents. The invoice described unsanctioned native plantings, unauthorized irrigation, and community-wide visual disruption. The wording was so absurd he laughed out loud in the hotel hallway, until he read the part that mentioned potential lien placement for non-payment. That was when the laughter stopped. Karen had used her position to both destroy and bill him for something he didn't authorize, using her preferred landscaper under a clause designed for actual emergencies like fire damage or erosion. Back in his hotel room, Dylan downloaded every second of footage and began piecing together the timeline. Karen's phone screen in the video showed she was actively live streaming during the destruction. The overlay text on her stream read, "Makeovers matter, restoring the block 1 yard at a time." Comments poured in, praising her taste and use of classic blooms, completely oblivious to the fact she was trespassing, damaging private property, and building her follower count on a foundation of theft and arrogance. The stream ended with her grinning into the camera, standing in front of his mutilated yard. The caption read, "Another eyesore erased. You're welcome, Brookstone." Dylan paused the clip, narrowed his eyes, and muttered, "Game on." Dylan had watched Karen's live stream 3 times, first in disbelief, then in slow-motion analysis, and finally like a prosecutor reviewing evidence before a trial. Her smiling face, framed by those ridiculous hydrangeas, was burned into his memory. But it wasn't just about plants anymore. This wasn't landscaping, it was image control. Karen wasn't beautifying anything. She was curating a fantasy, and Dylan's house had become her unwilling set. The good news, she was sloppy. The better news, Dylan was a digital forensics expert with a professionally hidden security system and a personal grudge. Karen must have suspected something. 2 days after the unauthorized remodel, she returned, this time with one of her landscapers and what looked like a handheld signal detector. On Dylan's front camera feed, she pointed to a small post near the driveway. "That rock's too perfect," she said. "Pop it open." The landscaper pried off the top of the decorative fixture, revealing a weather sensor disguised as a camera. Karen's face twisted with satisfaction. "He's spying on me, on the whole neighborhood. That violates HOA privacy standards." She grabbed it, yanked it loose, and handed it to the landscaper like a trophy. "Trash it. That's probably his only camera anyway." It wasn't. Not even close. Dylan leaned back in his desk chair, watching her smug little victory in 4K recorded not just from the weather sensor, but from 6 other locations. Bird feeder, porch light, mailbox pillar, even a fake sprinkler head embedded in the garden bed. Each feed backed up locally into a cloud server in real time. The footage showed not just Karen's destruction, but her directing others to do it, laughing about it, and worse, profiting from it via monetized content. He compiled the clips, time-stamped and organized by location, including her commentary about beautification and blocking the eyesores. But what turned his stomach was what came next. One of the newer clips showed Karen standing by the side of the house, holding her phone high on an extended selfie stick. She angled it through the window, his office window. Dylan froze the frame. On his desk, case documents, confidential notes, and a sealed evidence packet for a federal fraud case. Karen zoomed in. "Look at all those papers," she said to someone off camera. "No way he's not running a full-on business out of here. Totally against HOA policy. I'm submitting this." And just like that, the invasion of privacy turned into a potential professional landmine. If she had shared or published anything visible from that angle, she could jeopardize not just his home, but his career. Dylan's breath slowed. This wasn't just petty HOA drama anymore. Karen had entered federal violation territory, photographing what could constitute attorney-client privileged material without consent. He noted the timestamp, flagged it for legal relevance, and added it to his growing digital case file. And yet, amid the outrage, one line stuck out. A quiet moment of pure Karen logic that captured everything. She was arranging plants in front of the bay window when she turned to a landscaper and said, "Put the taller ones here. They'll block his view of the lake." The man hesitated. "That seems petty?" She shrugged. "Yeah, but it'll be funny." Dylan hit pause, leaned forward, and whispered, "You just landscaped yourself into a lawsuit." Then he clicked Export Footage, Exhibit A. Dylan didn't need to wait long for Karen's retaliation. 3 days after she'd uprooted his landscape and stolen camera hardware, a thick envelope from the Brookstone Hollow HOA arrived via certified mail. Inside, a formal complaint filed by Karen Delaney herself, accusing Dylan of operating a commercial business in a residential zone and installing unauthorized surveillance equipment to monitor neighbors. Attached were photos clearly taken through his office window of his desk mid-case, as well as a grainy image of the weather sensor she'd ripped out, marked dramatically with red arrows like a crime board. The board would be reviewing his violations at the next hearing. Suggested fine, $9,400, 0 cents, and immediate removal of all technological infrastructure. He stared at the letter, mouth flat. It was a perfect Karen move. Project blame, frame herself as a victim, and play the privacy card against someone who actually understood what it meant. He wasn't operating a business. He was working remotely, entirely legal under both state law and HOA guidelines. The unauthorized surveillance was on his own property, aimed inward, but facts didn't matter when someone like Karen controlled the narrative and the board. Dylan knew she'd likely already shared her story in one of her HOA influencer videos, probably with some tearful monologue about preserving community values while waving her rhinestone clipboard like a scepter. But she made one mistake. She left receipts. Dylan, frustrated but focused, started digging, this time into the HOA's financial reports. As a homeowner, he had the right to request recent vendor expenses and landscaping budgets. What he found wasn't just suspicious, it was absurd. Karen had billed the HOA nearly $18,000, 0 cents, over the last 4 months under emergency remediation, all using the same vendor, a landscaping company registered under the name Dale C. Landscaping Services. A quick business lookup confirmed what he suspected. Dale Carson was Karen's ex-husband. Their divorce had been finalized 2 years earlier, but they still co-owned a cottage in Pacific Grove. The company, meanwhile, was billing triple the average local rate for identical services. He went further, pulled invoices, matched plant types, calculated markup rates on the flowers she'd installed on his lawn. He found inflated charges on custom turf, unnecessary piping, and even $400, 0 cents billed for decorative placement consultation. What was that? A fancy term for pointing at the ground in flip-flops? Dylan laughed bitterly and flagged it. The paper trail wasn't just unethical, it smelled like fraud. The final punch came from her own mouth. While reviewing another clip from her backyard live stream labeled Restoration Diaries Episode 11, Karen spoke candidly to her audience. "My network needs fresh content," she said, sipping a lavender iced latte. "And you can't build an aesthetic movement when the guy across the street has wild grasses and utility-looking tech everywhere. He's totally throwing off the visual rhythm." She rolled her eyes. "Honestly, I'm doing this for the feed." The comments praised her dedication. Dylan clipped the audio and dropped it in a folder labeled Motivation, Exhibit B. He now had video, financials, motive, and intent, and Karen, in her quest to control the optics, had created the most damning portrait of herself possible, digitally curated and self-incriminating. But Dylan knew it wasn't enough to just confront her. Not yet. She still held the HOA's gavel, and public perception was her favorite weapon. If he wanted to bring her down, he needed more than evidence. That night, while reviewing more clips, Dylan paused on one where Karen directed a landscaper, "Add more pink blooms near the front. We're going for a dreamy aesthetic, not his weird lawyer jungle." She winked at the camera and said, "This one's going to trend." Dylan leaned forward and whispered, "Not the way you think." The more Dylan uncovered, the more surreal it became. What began as a personal property dispute was unraveling into something much larger, a pattern of HOA abuse, image manipulation, and thinly veiled corruption that stretched across Brookstone Hollow like a manicured lawn hiding sinkholes. But he knew he couldn't fight Karen alone, not when she had the HOA board under her bedazzled thumb and a growing online following of suburban aesthetes eating up her curb appeal crusade like it was gospel. So Dylan turned to the oldest legal strategy in the book, build a coalition. He started knocking on doors. Angela introduced him to the Sandersons, an elderly couple who had been fined $1,200.00 for repainting their back patio awning apricot dusk, a shade Karen claimed disrupted the Mediterranean palette of the community. Never mind that their house backed up to woods, not a neighbor. Then there was little Sarah, age 9, whose family received a violation notice for keeping a bunny named Waffles in a hutch on their porch. Karen had cited unregistered livestock. Sarah cried for a week. Her dad still had the violation pinned to their fridge like a war medal. Dylan listened, documented, and quietly added each account to a growing spreadsheet titled Pattern of Targeted Enforcement. But it wasn't until he met Ray, the county's water conservation technician, that things truly escalated. Dylan requested a professional review of the new landscaping Karen had installed, especially since it was being billed to homeowners as eco-friendly remediation. Ray showed up with a clipboard, a soil meter, and a skeptical look. 20 minutes later, he frowned at the glossy imported plants soaking up municipal water like sponges. "These aren't just non-native," he said. "They're on the county's restricted list, too thirsty for a drought zone, and if that irrigation line's tied into the public grid without a variance, someone's violating water use regulations." Dylan raised an eyebrow. "And what happens if they are?" Ray shrugged. "Fines, maybe even code enforcement. Depends how loud this gets." That was the moment Dylan decided to make it loud. He launched a YouTube channel called HOA Reality Check, uploading clips with full context, timestamps, voiceovers, citations of HOA bylaws. He paired each video with brief legal commentary and dry, sarcastic captions like "Visual Harmony, Where Wildflowers Go to Die," and "Karen vs. Native Plants, A Tragedy in 3 Acts." Then he clipped the juiciest, most damning sound bites into 30-second TikToks. Within 2 days, one video hit 40K views. Comments flooded in from users nationwide, people who had faced their own HOA nightmares. Finally, seeing someone fight back with receipts, the comment sections became support groups. She said, "Bunnies are livestock? Girl, what? This lady's aesthetic is given 2007 mall fountain energy. I'm a land use attorney. This is delicious." And then came the duet. A creator with 1.2 million followers stitched Dylan's clip of Karen bossing landscapers around in her wide-brimmed hat and floral kimono, added dramatic music, and delivered the line that would define the backlash. "Victor's style is giving dictator Barbie." The phrase took off like wildfire. That night, Dylan scrolled through the Ho Karen tag and paused at a new meme. Karen's face photoshopped onto a Roman emperor's bust, holding a clipboard instead of a scepter. The caption read, "All roads lead to fines." He couldn't help but grin. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over, not until the crown came off. By the time Karen called for an emergency HOA meeting to address the escalating misconduct of resident Dylan Mercer, Dylan already had a plan, a presentation, and a guest list. She thought she was walking into a show of force. What she got was a fully choreographed reckoning. The community center that evening buzzed louder than usual. Word had spread fast through long signs, HOA email chains, and more than a few viral TikToks. The room was packed, not just with residents, but with a local reporter from Channel 8, a civil attorney from Dylan's firm, and Ray from the county's environmental department, clipboard in hand and steel in his gaze. Karen arrived late, naturally, in a white pantsuit and a pearl-studded headband that screamed "Crisis Barbie." She breezed to the front, offered a tight smile, and opened with her signature blend of cheer and control. "We're here tonight to address the ongoing violations committed by Mr. Mercer," she said, her voice pitched like a preschool teacher hosting a tribunal. "Namely, unauthorized surveillance, professional misconduct, and environmental disruption affecting community harmony. She gestured to a blown-up photo of Dylan's office window and a chart titled Visual Disruptions and Neighborhood Mood Impact. A few people in the crowd exchanged glances. One guy coughed to hide a laugh. Dylan stood when invited to respond, calm, buttoned up, and holding a single flash drive. With the board's permission, he said, I'd like to share a compilation of relevant footage. Karen rolled her eyes dramatically, but the projector fired up behind her. What followed was a 20-minute highlight reel of HOA horror. Karen ordering unauthorized landscaping while live streaming, pulling out functioning irrigation lines, giving direction to plant species in violation of county code, and, most damning, zooming her selfie stick into Dylan's private office to capture confidential documents. Every clip was time-stamped, narrated in Dylan's clear, even voice, and cross-referenced with HOA bylaws and environmental regulations. Halfway through, the room shifted. Neighbors who had once feared Karen now leaned forward, arms crossed, jaws set. Ray stepped up with a binder and a microphone. My department has completed a formal evaluation of the modifications made by the HOA to Mr. Mercer's property, he began. The replacement landscaping is non-compliant with county drought policy, uses prohibited plant types, and includes an unauthorized water connection. If not remediated within 30 days, Brookstone Hollow faces a civil penalty of up to $25,000, 0 cents. A gasp rolled through the room. Karen's face twitched the first crack in her polished mask. Dylan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply finished with a statement that cut sharper than any insult. This was never about 1 yard, he said. It's about power, process, and how someone turned an HOA into a personal empire. But the thing about empires built on social media clout and selective enforcement is they crumble the moment you press play. The projector paused on a still frame of Karen grinning in front of his mutilated yard, captioned, "Another eyesore erased." The silence in the room was absolute. Then a teenager in the back raised his phone and muttered, "Just loud enough, she filmed her own downfall." Dylan glanced sideways and replied without missing a beat, "I just pressed play." But the night wasn't over. Karen still had one last card to play, and it was about to backfire spectacularly. The silence that followed Dylan's final line didn't last long. Within moments, the community center erupted, not in chaos, but in something quieter and more powerful. Murmurs of understanding, nods of vindication, the slow burn of a crowd realizing they'd been manipulated by a rhinestone tyrant. Karen stood frozen at the front, hands gripping the edge of the podium like it might save her. But even her signature smile, the one polished in 100 Instagram reels, had cracked. She tried to regain footing, raising a hand and announcing, "This meeting is now adjourned," but no one moved. Instead, a voice from the crowd called out, "I motion for a vote to remove the board president." A chorus of seconds followed, louder than she could talk over. Karen backed away as the vote commenced. Unanimous. Effective immediately, she was out. The fallout came fast and digitally. Within 48 hours, several of Karen's social media accounts were reported for harassment, privacy violations, and impersonation. TikTok suspended her @HOQueen official account indefinitely. Her Instagram live stream archive, where she once boasted about curating the soul of Brookstone, was taken down for community guideline breaches. Neighbors who had once feared Karen's clipboard now shared screenshots of her greatest hits, captioned with meme text like visual harmony or legal tragedy. And from power trip to road trip, someone even started a parody account called Dictator Barbie HOA Edition, complete with remix audios of Karen's quotes auto-tuned into synth pop. Dylan stayed quiet through the digital circus, declining interviews, ignoring press requests, and choosing not to pursue criminal charges, though he did quietly support the class action lawsuit forming behind the scenes. Several homeowners, including the Sandersons, Sarah's family, and even Ray, as a professional witness, joined together to file against the HOA for targeted enforcement, misuse of funds, and negligent governance. Dylan offered them evidence and guidance, but declined to be the face of it. "This isn't about me," he told Angela. "It's about making sure it never happens again." With Karen gone, the HOA called for emergency elections. Angela was nominated by 3 separate neighbors, including Dylan. She won by a landslide. Her first act as president? Sunset the Architectural Harmony Initiative and replace it with a clear, fair, and enforceable guideline policy drafted by a committee of actual residents, not Karen's hand-picked aesthetic consultants. Her second act? She showed up at Dylan's house with a tray of rosemary scones and a sketchbook. "We're going to rebuild this," she said, "but I want to do it our way." Over the next month, neighbors came by with seedlings, clippings, and stories. One offered native milkweed in honor of the monarch butterflies Karen once tried to ban for being too messy. Another brought rosemary in quiet defiance of the HOA memo that once outlawed strong herbal odors. Dylan planted each one personally, naming them after the residents they came from. A plaque at the edge of the garden read, "In Bloom We Trust," dedicated to those fined for living authentically. The vibe of Brookstone Hollow shifted. The surveillance Dylan once used as armor became shared infrastructure, used for safety, transparency, and yes, a few very tasteful neighborhood prank videos. Angela hosted open meetings on the lawn. The Sandersons repainted their awning a brighter orange just because they could. Even Sarah's bunny Waffles got his own sign, "Certified non-livestock resident." One morning, Dylan sat on his new bench, sipping coffee and watching hummingbirds return to the yard. His phone buzzed. It was Angela. Text, "You're not going to believe this. Karen's suing TikTok for defamation over memes." He stared at the screen, blinked twice, and then burst into laughter. After a pause, he propped up his phone on the garden gate, hit record, and looked into the lens. Sometimes the most powerful tool against control isn't anger, it's documentation, a sense of humor, and a well-placed hidden camera. Dylan didn't win because he yelled louder. He won because he listened, stayed calm, and built a case stronger than any clipboard dictatorship could withstand. In a world full of mini Karens and micromanagers, the real rebellion is knowing your rights, helping your neighbors, and planting rosemary anyway. If you've ever been fined for painting your mailbox the wrong shade of blue, this one's for you. Drop a comment if you've survived an HOA horror story, or better yet, if your bunny got evicted. Hit like, share with someone who's one petty rule away from snapping, and subscribe for more HOA drama, justice, and community porn pad chaos. Because in Brookstone Hollow, the HOA doesn't just stand for Homeowners Association, it now stands for Hold Others Accountable.